This is Rostra, the St. Theodore Guerin Junior Classical League podcast, where we bring the lessons of classical study into the light for the benefit of all. Well, welcome back to another episode of Rostra. We're really proud to have Kaitlyn Schiesser with us today. Kaitlyn is a freshman in Latin 1, and in some ways, we probably should have started with this as like the very first episode, giving the content of what you're going to talk about. So jump right into it. Tell everybody, what is your topic?
Yeah, so this is the legend of Romulus and Remus. So their parents, Mars, who's the god of war, and Princess Rhea Silvia, had two twins, Romulus and Remus. Fun fact, in other versions of the story, Hercules is their father.
Are you, no, seriously, I'm not making this up. I had not heard that detail before. So for literally for decades, I have always taught the one that is the most common, and actually is the one that you read about. There's a Roman historian named Livy, and he mentions the story of Mars and Rhea Silvia. I never heard Hercules as a possibility.
Yeah, I don't know. I saw it.
Interesting.
And it was like a trustworthy website, too.
Interesting. So. Okay. So I started to saw this, and maybe we should have started this season with this episode. Why is the story of Romulus and Remus so important to the study of Rome?
Just because it's like how Rome was like created, and like what went down. So pretty much their parents placed them in a basket and put them in the Tiber River because their father feared that they would overthrow him. So a little bit later, a she-wolf found them and cared for them, and then a shepherd took them and raised them as his own.
So there's an interesting parallel, if you think about it, to the Moses story, right? Where Moses gets put in a basket, put in a river, Pharaoh's daughter comes along and finds him. Similar sort of thing, right? The babies are put in this basket, and part of it was that they were put in the part of the river that really was flood water. And then once the flood receded and the waters went back to their normal boundaries in the river, there the babies are left high and dry. Along comes a wolf, and seriously, a wolf is supposed to have reared these baby humans.
Yeah, pretty much. They kind of expected the kids to die in the river. That was like the whole goal. Yeah. Was to just nonchalantly kill their kids.
Which, let's be honest, I think you got to be grateful that that's not really a thing today. That,
yeah.
Most children don't have to worry about that.
Yes. Yeah. So once they grew up, Remus was captured and taken to the king. And so Romulus went and saved him with some shepherds. And then they killed the king. Even though they were offered power within the kingdom, they just wanted a city of their own. So they just were like, we don't like you anymore. We're going to kill you now.
And another thing about these shows, and maybe we should do like a PG-13 warning on this podcast, because there's a lot of violence in the ancient world, right? And people, and I know a couple episodes back we had the assassination of Julius Caesar. And here's a bunch of senators who are not happy with somebody politically, and what do? Do they send out mean tweets about the guy? No, they whack him right there in the Senate, right? And so here you've got murder and so forth. And so the two boys now, they have, they're obviously grown up, and so they've committed murder. Where do you go from there, right? And so what did they do?
So they went back to where the she-wolf saved them to go build their city.
Yep.
So Romulus went to he wanted the city built on the Palatine Hill, but Remus wanted it on the Aventine Hill.
Uh-huh.
So they had like this big argument, and so they were both waiting for a sign from the gods, but they both claimed to have won.
Yes. Now, did your research tell you what sign or signs they saw?
Birds.
They saw birds.
Yeah. One of them saw 6 and one of them saw 12 first, but so you don't...
Right, is the thing. And so that was one of the things for the ancients. They thought you could actually figure out the will of the gods by looking at signs in nature. And one of those was bird signs. And so, yeah, the story goes that they're like, okay, well, we're twins, and so you can't really go with, well, who's the oldest, to be the king. You're twins. It's the same age. And so, yeah, one of the versions is that Romulus saw 12 birds. Remus saw 6 birds. Romulus says, well, I saw more. Remus says, yeah, but I saw him first. And so there was still conflict. So how did they resolve that?
Yeah. So Romulus just started building anyway, but Remus just kept making fun of, like, the wall because it was, like, really short. So Romulus got mad and killed him.
In my mind, well, first of all, we need to talk about the fact that in really the ancient world, even up through medieval times and so forth, cities would have a big wall built around them. That was their defense. And Romulus starts to build his city exactly as you said on the Palatine Hill, starts to build a wall around it. Remus starts to build his city on the Aventine Hill. And, well, folks, as you heard, they were obviously recording during school time, so there was our bell. And yeah, Romulus obviously was going to build a tall wall around his city, but he hadn't got it all the way built yet, and so Remus kind of makes fun of him for it. And in my mind, I don't know, in my mind, I see Remus like jumping back and forth over the wall just to mess with his brother, right? And at some point, Romulus gets frustrated and says, stop, don't do that. And Remus says, what, this? And he keeps jumping over the wall, and he says, what are you going to do? And Romulus says, well, I'm going to kill you. And he just runs him through with his sword.
Yeah.
So once Romulus kills his brother Remus, what then?
He just kind of finished his city. And he officially founded it on April 21st, 753 BC. And he made himself king and named it Rome after himself.
That's exactly it. April 21st, 753 BC. We still celebrate that as Rome's birthday. And, people who are just learning the story, like, well, how do you keep that straight? Romulus, Remus, which one of them did what? And there's a little poem. In fact, at some point, I think you may learn it in your class. Did Remus murder Romulus, or was the killing in reverse? To help remember who slew whom, just memorize this little verse. 'Twas Romulus killed Remus and lent his name to a tiny dream that grew to rule the Western world, and thus we study Rome, not Rheme. Because you think about it, right? If Remus had been the one, we'd be studying Rheme and Rheman history and the Rheman language, and now, of course, it's Rome and the Roman people and the Roman language. So, yeah. So what else do you have? Is there anything else that you found in your research about this really foundational story for Rome that you think people need to hear?
Well, I just kind of had a little bit about what actually happened.
Okay.
So...
But you're saying that didn't actually happen?
Yeah.
The story of a wolf rearing two...
Sadly not.
Oh, so there may be some actual history behind this.
Yeah, so that tale kind of makes it seem like Rome was created really quickly, but it wasn't, because the Latins had to take over so much land and they had to kick so many people out that it took a really long time. But they were really good farmers, and they had good trade, and they also eventually got a really good army, and that was kind of how they took control of most of the Italian peninsula.
Beautifully said. And even this historian that I mentioned earlier, this historian Livy, an ancient historian, he tells a story about the wolf and all that, and he says, this is one version. And then he tells he says, more realistically, it was probably this, and he goes on. You're exactly right. So, you think where Rome is located, it's located on the banks of a river. You mentioned the Tiber River earlier. That's just a good place to be. It's a good place for sending goods ultimately out to the sea to be shipped and so forth. There's good land around the river there for farming and so forth. So this is a good place to build.
Yeah, there were just a lot of people there in general because it was such good land.
Exactly. And you said it exactly right. Is over time where they grew, they built an army, eventually started conquering. Next thing you know, they took over the Italian peninsula and then the rest of the world there. Well, Kaitlyn, thank you so much. It's great to have you on the show. Yeah, and we hope to have you back sometime. Thank you for listening to Rostra. You may check out all our episodes on Spotify and follow us on social media at GuerinJCL. That's at GuerinJCL.